I'm John. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, John.
And yes, I do have less than a year. So I'm make a good suspect. Um, yeah. So I'm going to be at 7 months tomorrow. But what brought me here today, besides Sally, of course, was really the starting point. I've got the story that starts with really any sign pointing anywhere but me ending up pretty much everywhere I did end up as an alcoholic. I had good parents who took care of me. Came from a big family. I've got 6 siblings. I never really wanted for anything. I was never really abused verbally, physically. Um, I had a very happy childhood. Nothing really would have pointed to me really choosing a life that turned out to be, for a long time, pretty miserable and not really what I had expected. Um, I'm number 5 of 7. So I was kind of on the younger end, but I was about the middle child. And as such, I tended to um, listen to a lot of my older and younger siblings argue, and they were really loud. I tend to be a little on the quiet side, but what that meant was for a long time, I guess I didn't feel like I spoke up much. I didn't have much of a voice, and that kind of translated as I went into middle school and high school. I found that I was always kind of reaching for something. Being kind of on the younger side of my family, I always looked up to the older kids. My oldest sister's over 10 years older than me, so I was always trying to step outside of where I was at. I was never really living in the present, even from a young age. So probably when I was about 14, started getting curious. I wanted to see what this alcohol was all about. Pretty much any kind of substance at that time, and I found that I had found everything I thought I was looking for. Suddenly, I most definitely had a voice. Usually, too much of one at that point. Instead of at that time I had shot up like a bean sprout, but I was still pretty skinny. But I was very skinny and very tall suddenly with bright red hair. I stood out walking around the halls of my high school and middle school, and suddenly I'd found something that seemed like the absolute solution to every single one of my problems. I could walk around confidently, go to all the parties where I imagined all the cool kids that I wanted to be like were. Um, really didn't have much of a care in the world when I was drinking. And at least at the time, I didn't think to myself, I want to be like in this state permanently and just continue this onward. For a little bit, maybe a year or so, I thought I really enjoy this feeling, and I want to have it on the weekends. But of course, like so many people's stories, that developed well into my 20s, into just further and further progression. My disease was anything but. It didn't really stop until I was ready to stop. I just every time I found a bottom, I would find a new one, and that meant for me. Out of the 7 children from my parents, I'm the only one who's been to jail. Um, I've been through several horrible relationships, mostly caused by me. Um, just the damage I've left in my wake through my drinking was pretty palpable, and it was something that up until my late 20s, I could not manage to spend more than say a week without the bottle. The shame, the guilt, it was just I was overcome by it, and I let it run my life. Fears ran my life. So really, what really started my progress towards recovery was I had reached that point where it was. it was essentially life or death. I was starting to pass out. I was so nutritionally uh, void that I was passing out. I broke my jaw. Busted my head open. Um, and the doctors were telling me, like I had heard before, that man, if you don't get sober, you're going to die. Um, and it had never really resonated with me before, but for whatever reason, I was 29 at the time, and my life had hit just the right point that I was finally ready to hear at least something. I didn't know exactly what that was going to look like, or where I was going to go, or really how any of this was done. But I for that split second, I had really distanced myself from having grown up in a pretty religious family. I had really distanced myself from anything I would consider a God, a higher power. And that was the first time I had genuinely tried anything resembling prayer. I don't exactly remember what it was I said, but I was sitting in a hospital bed with several IV drips hooked up to me to keep me alive. And, um, it was the first time I was at least humble enough to reach out, in that case, to whatever was out there. I didn't know what I believed in, or, if I really believed anything would change. But that was the first time in probably a decade I actually felt essentially or an overwhelming sense that if everything was going to be all right, which was a weird sensation, weird feeling to me. Um, but it started me on the path, and I spent the next 2 years in essentially an inpatient program, really trying to get my life together. And in that time, it worked, and I started to learn more and more about AA. Whereas, I mean, beforehand, my entire knowledge of AA was essentially stopping in at a meeting maybe 3 times before that. But what really inspired me about AA was some of the guys who had gone before me through that same program. They would come back week after week, and we had an AA meeting where they would come in and share. And I took note of the fact that the people who stayed sober even after that 2 year stint, because I mean, I went in wanting to essentially be cured. I wanted to do that, and then I'd be good and cured for the rest of my life. And as it turned out, I watched several people prove otherwise. But the people who proved that it was possible were the ones who would consistently come in and talk about how they ran a solid program. They had a sponsor. They worked the steps. Most of them had sponsees, um, and I didn't even realize it at the time. But they were being of service to me and to my fellow brothers there in the program by showing up, because we were kind of a glum lot for a good while. Um, so after I finished that program, I started out what I would call pretty strong. Started going to meetings. I had finished the steps. I had a single sponsee, but I did prove to myself just the classic story. I started to slow down in the meetings. I wasn't as excited about going. And as soon as I started missing a meeting or two a week, it became really easy to slip right into the ever elusive or ever enticing trap of not really going to meetings. And, when it didn't cause me trouble the first little while, I just continued down that path. And I think everyone in this room probably knows where it ended up. I, uh, I relapsed, and within a month, I was pretty much back to square one. I was everything that I remembered that was bad about my disease, my alcoholism, was right back. And for me, it was honestly a huge wake-up call, because despite everything I had learned through coming to the meetings, through working with other alcoholics, despite that, I was right back in it, and it was not stopping. And what really brought me back was, by the grace of God, I happen to be, I know pretty much everyone I know up here in Washington is in recovery. And I finally reached that point where I was ready to reach out again and come with my tail between my legs. And I do believe the first meeting I came back to was actually Whiskey Rose. And I walked into the rooms looking pretty shabby and honestly kind of confused. And it was the most terrifying walk of my life, because I didn't realize the lights would also be kind of bright. But it was, for me, a momentous occasion. Everything that I really needed to learn, I had learned in that last stint, as far as knowing that's not what I wanted from life, and the way to keep from revisiting that was to take the advice and be humble and keep following the direction of these people who had, even at that point, a year, 2 years, or 30 years. And essentially everyone they have their own twist on it, but everyone has the same advice. And that's what I've been doing. I immediately got a new sponsor, started working the steps again, took on service positions, which for me, many of them have been curious. I mean, they get me out of my comfort zone, and that's good for me, because as I heard many times before, and I didn't always listen to it, there really is no growth in comfort. And if nothing else, the second I get complacent and I start slowing down, I really am regressing. And so since that day, back in November 5th, when I sobered up, it's just, that has essentially become my life. And my life now is, honestly, it's incredible how quickly it can turn around. I guess I can't say that I had reached square one quite yet. I still had a job, but I was well on my way to square one or zero. But now I have friends in AA. I look forward to going to my meetings. They're, in a lot of ways, they're the highlight of my week, because I do know deep down, every meeting I go to, regardless of who's sharing or what the subject matter is, I always leave better than when I came in. On top of that, I have real relationships with my family that I had let deteriorate over the years. And it's great to see and hear the life come back in their voices when they're talking to me. Because for many years they did think they were one day going to get a call and I was going to be dead. Whereas now they look to me for advice, especially. It's funny hearing when they call and they ask about a neighbor kid and they want to know, what would you recommend? Which is always funny, because I'm just about 7 months in. I don't know all that much about anything, I would say. I've got a ways to go. But so far, it hasn't let me astray. And I put my trust in the program and my higher power. And I do believe if I keep doing this, then I will see, I'm counting on at least 30 years. But I'll make it more. That's all I got.